Actually, I should probably save before it breaks again, and I have to redo an entire hour. But even though he didn't know what would happen, he could do nothing but keep running. He too felt scared. He buried these feelings in the depths of his heart and kept walking onwards. If he looked, he would freeze with fear. But Asato's words still struck him. Really, he was afraid too. Was Asato seeing through him? Succumbing to his self-loathing, Konoe quietly sighed and turned his face away. Asato looked down to his feet, then raised his head up again after a few moments. His ears were still lowered. His tail moved closer, but he was still unsure if he should touch it to Asato's or not. Even though they were the same color, why did his own look wild and ominous? They were just words that randomly spilled out. Even though it was a legitimate question, he didn't really know the answer, so he just continued to say what he felt. Oh. Give in to whom? These questions rose from the bottom of his heart. No? No kidding, really? Oh really? I wouldn't have known. Asato muttered to himself and looked down at his hand. His claws had left clear grooves in the earth. Asato spun his words little by little, turning his blue eyes straight towards Konoe. They were deep blue, like the sky illuminated by moonlight. Konoe steadily stared back as if to reach into the depths. Oh, that was too fast. Asato nodded, his drooping ears perked up just slightly. Konoe reached out with the tip of his tail and slipped it around that brown arm, stroking it. Asato's eyes blinked in surprise and Konoe smiled a little, mischievous. I love how I can use these long breaks for drinking water. Look how happy he is. He's just a little guy. He's just a little guy. The sorrow reflected in Asato's face for some time now melted away. He smiled. Konoe sighed unintentionally. Asato's eyes turned down, but his ears perked up and his tail shook in ease.
俺は近衛を殺したくないことを諦めない。なんかそれそうか。そうだよ。
Asato's genuinely confused face made Konoe want to laugh. He suppressed it and instead slightly narrowed his eyes.
変なやつだ。
He then put one hand on the ground and moved towards Asato's upper body, pushing the tip of his nose against Asato's shoulder even as Asato moved back in surprise. It was a sign of affection exchanged between friends. Asato's eyes opened wide and he froze, overcome with surprise. Not thinking it was that shocking, Konoe was a little confused. Then Asato suddenly turned to a tree behind them and started to frantically sharpen his claws. He's nervous.
何してるんだ。爪研ぎを。
He's so nervous he doesn't know what to do.
それは見ればわかる。そうか。
For a while, the dry sound of claws being sharpened on the tree continued. Konoe didn't really intend to stop him. He leaned against the protruding root of the large tree, casting Asato glances of amazement and confusion. As he watched him, he thought, why did the red shadow attack them? Obviously, Konoe was its target. Was it orchestrated by the third cat Firi had spoken of? That was just a shadow, so they would soon have to deal with the devil's true form. He didn't understand. His irritation spiked along with his doubt. He was just one of the simple cats of Kaoru. Why him?
眠いのか?
Asato asked him, and Konoe opened his eyes again. Since when had he dozed off? In the corner of his mind, he felt sleep beginning to creep in. Asato seemed to have finished sharpening his claws, and the shavings from the tree he'd done it on were now gathered up in a huge pile at his feet. The victimized tree now looked miserable with its thin and exposed appearance. He looked up at the sky, which appeared to have traces of white. Dawn would break soon, but he thought he wanted to rest a little more.
お前、どうする？ん？この後だよ。村には戻れない。俺が帰らなければ、今度は俺を始末するための追っ手がかかるはずだ。お尋ね者が2匹か。
He sighed, wondering what they should do now. Asato moved restlessly and turned his body towards Konoe. The pile of tree shavings collapsed helplessly.
お前はどうしたい？俺は近衛と一緒がいい。
So cute. Asato muttered in a subdued voice. Although he had a bigger build than Konoe, sometimes his timid behavior struck him as odd. Still, he supported his decision. If he rejected the elders' orders, they didn't need to fight. On top of that, he didn't know if something like that red shadow would appear again. He needed to work on his fighting skills. Above all, he didn't want to travel alone any longer. Asato's honesty was reassuring. Asato turned a timid and questioning gaze towards him. Well, then it's decided.
じゃあ、決まりだな。
Asato's ears perked up as his eyes shifted towards him. His tail stuck straight out. After that, he turned around again and faced the tree trunk, raising his claws to it. More torment from his strong claws made the tree way too pitiful. Konoe used his tail to dust away the wood shavings around Asato, indirectly hinting for him to stop.
こら。すまん。つい。
He purposely gave a lengthy sigh with an annoyed face at Asato, whose shoulders lowered. But why did his heart feel slightly lighter? He felt as though some of the dark gloom engulfing him had been diminished. Just the idea of not being alone made him feel at ease. It was mysterious, because when he was alone, he wasn't bothered by it, and even though he was better off, thought. After that, he rested his body and looked up at the trees surrounding them. The moon of shadows was setting to the left, which meant Ranson was straight ahead. He wanted to get going as soon as the moon of light started rising. I thought you wanted to sleep. Asato insisted on keeping watch first, so Konoe had climbed high into a tree. He wanted to look out over a greater distance. Konoe sat at the base of a thick branch and leaned against the trunk. A magnificent sea of forest spread out before his eyes. It stirred beneath him like a living creature. While he watched, sleep gradually overtook him. He wondered if Asato was also asleep. While thinking about these things, Konoe sank into a deep sleep. Konoe awoke to a glaring light. He dropped his eyebrows and looked around. The light of dawn shone down on Konoe's face. It must have woken him up. He hadn't even realized he'd fallen asleep. After taking a big stretch, he looked down below. He'd promised to switch watch with Asato halfway through the night, but since Konoe had fallen asleep, maybe Asato didn't want to wake him up again. But no matter how much he looked for him, Asato was nowhere to be found. Where had he gone? Konoe suddenly got a bad feeling. It couldn't be. Had a Kiran pursuer come before dawn? If that was the case, Asato must have left to lure the pursuer away. It was something he didn't want to think about. Konoe clicked his tongue and cursed his own stupidity for falling asleep, seized by a sense of guilt. He wanted to go look for Asato right away, but immediately gave up on that idea. Maybe Asato would come back on his own. Been recording for like over 2 hours today. It's starting to take a toll on me. But it's so fun now. Now the story is starting to pick up. Konoe calmed his brash impulse and leaned against the tree trunk. But after some time passed, he didn't feel Asato's presence returning. Not knowing what else he could do, he jumped down from the tree, deciding to move on for a little while. He wanted to look for Asato if possible, but it wouldn't be a good idea to do that in this forest. He couldn't just walk around calling out his name. It would be okay. Asato was strong, he convinced himself. Hoping they'd meet again, Konoe began to walk northward. I have to blow my nose again, ugh. Faint light poured through the gaps of the overlapping leaves. The moon of light floated in the sky, having already passed over him. There were markings on the tree trunks, but since there were so many of them, their meaning was completely lost. He couldn't tell where he was now. He was getting lost, and he would probably starve to death or be killed by monsters or bandits. He felt resigned to his fate as he walked. Suddenly his nerves stirred, and his fur stood on end. He stopped and quickly looked around. There was something here. It was trying to hide its presence, but he could feel it. A faint, killing spirit floated through the air. Konoe lowered his stance and dropped a hand on his sword. He felt like it wasn't the first time he'd experienced this. Who was it? His ears laid flat and his tail stood on end as he readied his sword. A gust of wind whirred past his eyes, cutting the thread of tension. A scathing light flashed overhead. Sparks flew and a numbness spread through his arm as though his very bones were quivering. What's Ray? Close to their crossed swords was a single transparent blue eye. It was that silver-haired cat. A shiver ran up his spine. That momentum's power loosened and he pushed hard against his sword. The silver-haired cat was expressionless, not even twitching an eyebrow. Konoe took a step back. He wondered just where this cat's strength was coming from. Feeling like he was being pushed back and overpowered, Konoe gathered all his power in his low body and strongly repelled the sword. I do love this face shot of him, it's very, very gorgeous. He then jumped back. As his shoulders heaved with his rough breathing, Konoe glared at the silver-haired cat. His arms still felt numb. His mind wandered and his sword lowered, but the silver-haired cat remained unaffected as though nothing had happened. His features were just as Konoe remembered, sharp, with a dignified coldness to them. His piercing gaze robbed Konoe of his breath. Konoe felt a heavy pain in his chest. His heart began to beat strongly. It couldn't be. Was this empathy of this cat's emotions? Batump, batump. The pulsing resounded through his body. It was coming. Pain, as if his chest was being crushed. Nausea welled up. His head ached. Everything torturing his body came from the cat standing before him. Sweat ran from his temple to his cheek. Suddenly, the shadow of a snake flashed across his mind. He felt something wriggling in the depths of his stomach. The silver-haired cat slowly raised his sword. Konoe could read no emotions from his face. But flowing out of him were waves of intense fighting spirit, rage, and the urge to kill. And then, a pulse of strange feelings of enjoyment. He enjoyed this? Fighting? But no matter how much he looked, he could read nothing from the silver-haired cat. Joy, sadness. Hard. I'm gonna say it's rather pleasant. Why was it? For some reason he felt like bursting out laughing, yet it was definitely not from happiness. It was something darker, sopping with corruption. I don't like. Nah. I think I made the wrong choice there. I don't like that. Still, he felt the urge to laugh manically. I'm just gonna run with my decisions here, you know? His vision blurred. It was like the pain was singeing his nerves. Still, silver-haired cat's shadow swayed. He moved, and I'm blowing my nose. An ear-piercing sound echoed, and then vanished into the trees. An eerie silence followed. They fought sword to sword. The sword pushed against Konoe's had a short blade. The silver-haired cat reached behind his back with his other hand and swiftly pulled out the long sword he was armed with. Damn it, Konoe recalled too late. This cat fought with two swords. He had forgotten while he was enduring the agony of his empathy. He lifted his long sword high above his head. Konoe's blade was still caught by the edge of the dagger. He sensed a slight smile on the other cat's lips. Ignoring his aching body, Konoe roared with all of his might. With a strength that he thought would split his muscles, he repelled the dagger, then twisted his upper body as he ducked. At the same time, he used his freed sword to catch the incoming longsword's blow. A high-pitched sound rattled his eardrums. The silver-haired cat withdrew his stab, then charged while using his dagger as a shield. Konoe jumped back, blocking his opponent's incoming attacks in quick succession. His feet became entangled, and he almost fell back. Just like he thought. His opponent was strong, his fluid movements were almost beautiful, and Konoe felt very captivated. While the empathic pain raged on, Konoe was forced to keep defending. If he couldn't somehow gain control of the situation, he'd lose. The cat with the silver hair fixed his eye on Konoe to challenge him. His pupil narrowed to a slit. Konoe evaded the blade his opponent swung by crouching down, and then stepped in towards the silver-haired cat. He bared his fangs and growled threateningly, then lashed out with the claws of his other hand. His opponent moved aside and avoided the blow, but Konoe kicked the ground and jumped into the trees, kicking up against their trunks to leap into the air. A sharp pain rang through his chest, but there was no time to be concerned about it. Below him was the silver-haired cat's back. His opponent turned around immediately. Most likely he'd counterattack. Either way, Konoe didn't know if he'd hit his mark. But he had to, or he'd only be pushed backward. It was a weak gamble. With the moon of light in his back, he raised his sword high above his head. Silvery white hair approached before his eyes. Just as Konoe thought he'd caught him, his shadow had already disappeared. Konoe clicked his tongue as he landed. He felt movement behind him. As soon as he turned around, he felt wind and saw a gleam of light. He heard the sharp sound of tearing fabric, and heat ran up his arm. He'd been cut. Konoe fought off the silver-haired cat's sword and jumped back. He clutched his arm. It was gushing heat. Confusion and irritation disheveled his thoughts, but the silver-haired cat didn't attack any further. Love his ears. The silver-haired cat opened his mouth, and a dignified voice pierced through the depths of Konoe's ears. When Konoe's fur bristled, the silver-haired cat smirked slightly. He sheathed his dagger at his waist and lifted his coat. On his exposed arm stood a distinct red cut. When he came close, had Konoe managed to hit him? He was so distracted he didn't even notice. The pain of empathy faded away, and Konoe felt a strange, uplifting sense of elation. Elation? Instead. The silver-haired cat. He'd wanted to meet him again, but he'd never imagined it would be like this. The silver-haired cat used his pale fingers to trace his wound, catching the dripping blood and licking it off. Because his skin and hair were both so pale, the red of his blood and tongue left a vivid impression. The cat sternly fixed his eye on Konoe. Konoe was offended by his arrogant tone. Bruh! What was with this guy? Konoe frowned at his arrogant words. Well? The silver-haired cat stuck his sword into the ground and smiled condescendingly at him. Konoe's stomach suddenly felt hot. Before, he had admired that silver-haired figure, but now he felt stupid for even entertaining the thought. Maybe. He grit his teeth. His tail swelled out thickly as he growled low in the depths of his throat. The silver-haired cat's lips curved into a thin smile of amusement.
そう熱くなるな。すぐに頭に血が上る猫は早死にするぞ。周りが見えなくなりやすい。うるさい。あんた、一体何なんだ。俺になんか用でもあるのか。噛みつき癖もあるか。
Bro, what was this guy's problem? Konoe knew he was being provoked, but that didn't calm his irritation at all.
黙れ!
Ignoring the wound on his arm, Konoe once again stepped forward towards the silver-haired cat. He lunged out, but his attack was easily avoided. It was clear that even though the other cat moved to take a step, it wasn't his real intention. That fanned the flames of Konoe's anger even more. In that moment, he recklessly smashed his sword into nothing. Thrusting his sword out made him lose his balance. In a split second he tried to get back up again, he felt something knocking his feet back. He thought his body floated in the air, but before long his shoulder hit the ground. He'd been tripped. When he tried to get up, a sharp wind passed by the side of his face. A dull sound followed. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw a sword thrust into the ground.
こんな見えすいた足払いに引っかかるか。今言っただろ。頭に血が上りやすい猫は早死にする。
Well, I do remember not liking him very much. I cannot deny that he is hot, okay? I cannot deny it. Like, look at him. I like Asato more, but you are also hot, okay? Resting both hands on the hilt of the sword, the silver-haired cat looked down at Konoe.
もう一度聞くぞ。お前はどこの猫で何という名前だ。強情だな。
Bro.
なんでそんなこと知りたがる。
Konoe is such a brat! Oh my god! I mean, I knew, but like, I love him, but like, damn! I mean, if there's a guy with a sword just standing here and looking at you, it might be good to answer the questions eventually. I don't know.
自分に傷をつけた猫のことだ。知りたがっても別段おかしくはない。そんなに自分の腕に自信があるのか。俺の話はどうでもいい。今はお前のことを聞いている。言え。
Cold light dwelled in the eye of the cat who looked at Konoe. Overwhelmed by the daunting power in them, Konoe kept silent. A strand of silver hair flowed down over the cat's shoulder, gleaming in the sunlight.
俺はあまり気が長い方じゃない。顔に穴を開けたいのなら、このまま黙っている。
Konoe was seized with the impulse to lunge up and bite him. Really, what was with this guy? He just appeared suddenly and already treated him like this. It didn't make sense. He was being forced, so he didn't want to just open his mouth. But he didn't think the silver-haired cat was joking. He really thought he'd be pierced with that sword if he didn't answer. He lifted his head, barely swallowing his pride. He'd comply, for now.
コノエ、カローの猫だ。カローか。答えただろ。剣をどけろ。
The silver-haired cat gradually disappeared from his sight. When he tried to raise his body on his elbows, a dull pain ran through Konoe's shoulders. It was probably from when he was knocked down. He endured the pain and checked the place where he'd been cut. Just as he thought, it wasn't very deep. It had already started to scab. Konoe let out his tension with a short, irritated sigh. He cast a sharp look to the silver-haired cat standing before him.
今度はあんたの番だ。名前はライダ。出身はセツラ。
Setsura. They had the bloodline of the large-sized species. This ear is a bit too forward. It should be placed a little back, right? His gaze moved to Rei's white tail. It was a lot different from Konoe's, large and bushy. His ears were a different shape too.
なんで突然俺の目の前に現れたいきなり仕掛けてきた理由はうるさい猫だな
True.
質問が多いだが悠長に答えている時間はなさそうだ
Rai's pupils narrowed instantly once he spoke. Someone was there. Asato? Maybe? Firi? There was a sound of something running through the bushes. His ears perked up and he listened intently. Perhaps there were two of them. They were heading this way. Konoe concentrated on their presence and brandished his sword. The base of his tail stiffened, and his fur began to stand on end. The rustling in the trees and bushes grew louder. Soon there were two shadows beyond the trees. In an instant they came closer. Suddenly, Rai ran. Blah. He drew his dagger from his sheath and charged at the two shadows.
Oi!
Konoe's voice overlapped the high-pitched sound that echoed through the empty forest. There was silence. Through the gaps between the trees, he saw Rai parrying someone's attack with his sword. The silence was torn by the sound of their clashing weapons. Rai took several big steps back, and two cats jumped out of the trees to pursue him. One had a black spotted tail, the other had a black and brown stripes. Without the A.
なんだよクソ今度こそ取ったと思ったのによなかなか死なないなあんたいい加減くたばってくれてもいいんじゃない
Rai scoffed at their ridiculous words. They seemed to know each other. Konoe only stared in amazement at their exchange.
悪いがそのつもりはない諦めろ諦めろだってんなこと言われてはいそうですかなんて言えっかよはいそうですか黙れバカ
As the two of them bickered, Rai slowly readied his sword.
その軽い口をそろそろ閉じたらどうだそういうあんたこそいい加減消えてくんない目障りでしょうがないんだよ俺らの周りでちょこまかとさおそれはこっちも同じだもうちょうどいいからさここで潰すこないださ新しいの覚えたんさ俺それで一発だよ
The black-spotted cat smiled slightly as he sheathed his sword for some reason. The striped cat held his sword with both hands and crouched down low. Did he intend to fight alone? Doubt entered Konoe's mind. The black-spotted cat reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a flute. He put it to his lips and closed his eyes. Could he be?
Sare.
Rai spoke slowly, as if he'd sensed Konoe's unrest.
邪魔だ死ぬのが嫌なら早く消えろ
If you don't fancy dying.
あいつらもしかして
He could say no more than that. The striped cat attacked. Rai and Konoe both jumped back immediately. The striped cat had no concern for Konoe, so he aimed his sword to clash with Rai's. Even though Rai had told him to leave, Konoe didn't move. He didn't want it to look like he was running away again. Besides, he wanted to see how this fight played out with his own eyes. From the looks of it, Rai had the advantage. He used his dagger to skillfully counterattack, pushing the striped cat to retreat.
早くしろクソ猫尻尾ぶち抜くぞわーってるようるせえななかなか乗ってこねえんだよ黙ってろ
The black-spotted cat then played his flute. The sounds vibrated through the air and seemed to shake through the depths of the forest. Suddenly, the body of the speckled cat began to glow faintly. His hair and tail swayed gently as if he were floating in water. He began to play a melody on his flute, a high-pitched, fleeting tune that enveloped their surroundings. That cat. Was he a sangha? This was a song. He was singing. Particles of delicate light are emitted from the chest of the speckled cat and flowed towards the striped cat. The striped cat grinned.
当然だよバカ。
The striped cat stepped back, then charged at Rai the very next instant. Ugh. He moved like a fish in water. Konoe's eyes were filled vividly with that power. Rai retaliated with his sword and an angry cry. Not even leaving time to blink, the striped cat started to thrust his sword with a frightening speed. Rai grit his teeth and parried the succession of attacks with the two swords in his hands. He didn't have the opportunity to counterattack. The striped cat just kept coming. He grumbled, as if this fight wasn't enough for him. The echoing sounds of the flute filled the air. The tune already had a slight note of triumph to it. A song that bestowed the power of wind? Konoe looked carefully. The striped cat's movements certainly seemed carried by the wind. It was like he was controlling it, receiving its support. The effects are very loud. They are very, very loud right now. But I don't know where to go to the options. I'm gonna go through all the... No. As they argued, there was a chance to attack, but Rai remained on the defensive. Huh. No. He'd gotten some distance between them, but the striped cat followed as if drawn by an invisible thread. That's not it. Ah! Sound effects on. But they're too loud. There we go. I forgot what button it was. No. As Rai tried to jump into the depths of the trees, the striped cat reached out and grabbed his tail. Rai was pulled down, and both he and the striped cat fell. The two of them hissed and growled ferociously as they violently struggled with each other. Dust flew everywhere. The sound of the flute spiraled up and intensified. Heaving their swords away, they kept fighting with their claws and fangs. Flecks of blood stained Ray's skin here and there. His throat shook as he stifled his moans of pain. If this kept up, Ray would probably lose. Konoe muttered, turning his eyes to the black-spotted cat. The one giving power to the Tolga was that cat, the Sangha. He thought, maybe if he could defeat that Sangha somehow, they stood a fighting chance. Why he even considered it, why he was so desperate, was something he didn't really understand for himself. But Rai had saved his life once, so he couldn't just abandon him and leave. He aimed for the Sangha. With his ears lying flat and his pupils narrowed to slits, Konoe leapt at the black-spotted cat. He needed to stop the song. In his mind, that was all that mattered right now. The black-spotted cat opened his eyes wide in surprise. Konoe lashed his claws as hard as he could at the cat's face. The striped cat turned around and immediately lunged at Konoe. Rai barked as he sat up. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw the spotted cat leap at him. In front of him, the striped cat drew his claws. Silly Konoe. A hot shock surged through his shoulder, through his tail, but he didn't have time to feel pain. He didn't know what had happened, but he saw someone biting at him, and claws lashing at what was touching his hand. There was a scream, but he didn't know if it was his own or the other two cats. Suddenly, a muddy stream flowed into his chest. The effect of his empathy. Emotions spread through him. They crept into the depths of his chest as if he'd breathed in a whirlwind of them. He felt horribly nauseous. It hurt. He swallowed. He couldn't breathe. His view, thoughts, and consciousness split open and were buried. While he drowned in these emotions, he suddenly felt that a light was born and rose up. Ah, that lovely melody, which is his theme. White light rose inside him and overflowed. He began to hear the subtle hints of some kind of sound. A gentle melody. It flowed pleasantly. This was a song. What song was it? He remembered the poet. He released a song and light. The screams practically pounded in his ears as he returned to consciousness from amidst that white space. Like a gust of wind, Rai flashed across his view. Konoe fell to the ground as his eyes followed the spectacle. While he was being overwhelmed just a little while ago, Rai was amazingly now on the attack. He was fighting both cats at once, cornering them. He thrust his sword out without an ounce of concern. The sound of the flute stopped, and the incessant clashing of swords replaced it. Had something happened to Rai? Had they crushed the opponent's Sangha? No. Konoe felt like Rai had gained strength beyond even that. He felt the expression on Rai's face had changed. He stained his eyes. He was smiling? Chills ran down his spine. Unable to understand the situation, Konoe tried to stand. Pain ran through many parts of his body, but strangely, it wasn't painful at all. He felt power surge from up deep within him. He inadvertently looked over his own body, startled. He had become gay. No. Light. Threads of thin, white light surrounded him. When he looked closely, they seemed to be drifting towards Rai. Rai. Oh, look at my pretty boy. In a daze, Konoe heard a faint song. More precisely, the song echoed from within him. He was filled with the melody and light, and his stiffened tail relaxed. Rai walked around the two cats with great dignity. As if they were linked, more light welled inside him and then flowed out of his body. The song echoing in his ears intensified. This was a song of battle. The thought was sudden. No words were spoken, but suddenly lyrics began to rush through his head. He was singing. Singing with a voiceless voice. Rai's movements were undoubtedly swift. They continuously flowed one after the other in the blink of an eye. Various sounds followed them. His lack of hesitation captured Konoe's eyes, and tracing him. Finally, two high-pitched sounds seemed to stop time. The two cats lost their weapons and grit their teeth, glaring in aggravation at Rai. I love this song so much. Rai put his dagger back in his sheath and drew his long sword. The two of them suddenly turned at the same time and jumped into the grove of trees. Rai lowered his posture in order to jump after them. But instead, Rai stopped and turned around towards Konoe. In no time, the two cats' presence had vanished.
追わなくていいのか。お前は。
Rai stared at Konoe. He sensed confusion flickering in his blue eyes.
歌が聞こえた。お前から。歌？
A song. The battle song. That reminded him he could no longer hear that song. The threads of light surrounding his body also faded and disappeared.
頭の中に直接響いてくるような言葉のない歌だ。途端に力がみなぎった。眠っていた気力をかき起こされるような感覚だ。これほどの効果があるとは。
Oh, sorry. Rai narrowed his eyes as if he was trying to determine something.
お前、まさかサンガだったとはな。
Sangha. Him. Konoe couldn't immediately digest the meaning of those words, but after a little bit of thought it dawned on him. He was dumbfounded. A Sangha.
俺がサンガ。そうだ。もしかして歌ったことがないのか。
Unable to think about very much, he only nodded. Rai smirked.
随分と貴重な瞬間に立ち会ったものだな。なら断言してやる。トガとして感じたことだ。お前はサンガだ。
Konoe was speechless, unable to decipher if he felt happy or scared. He just couldn't believe it. It didn't seem real. He was a Sangha? His ears and the tip of his tail prickled and went numb.
嘘だろ。
Rai muttered reflexively with a scornful scoff.
いずれ思い知るようになる。せっかく発露したその力、使わなければ損だ。手にしたくともできない連中は大勢いる。使うって、どうやって？歌を歌った時のことを覚えているか？
When he was singing, he remembered the two cats had pounced on him, but after that his memories were a blur. He hadn't even realized that I was fighting them. Konoe shook his head. Rai sheathed his sword, his tail swaying from side to side.
そうか。なら今回は偶然だったということになる。安定させるまでは訓練が必要だろうな。訓練。
When he repeated his words, Rai's hand caught his shoulder. He pulled him close, a blue eye drawing near. Surprised, Konoe reflexively looked away.
話せよ。俺と一緒に来い。
The sudden words bewildered him.
手助けをしてやる。サンガとしての能力を高めるための。
He felt a strong aversion and shook his arm free from the hand on his shoulder. Alright, my dears. This is the moment where the game is crashing again, not letting me save. And this is the moment where we end this part. See you in the next.